Hello and welcome to Let's Talk About a series dedicated to esteemed leaders, authors, artists, marketers, creators, entrepreneurs, and brands, sharing tips, expert advice on business, media, and really life in general. I'm your host, Cynthia Nelson, three-time entrepreneur, Forbes contributor, investor, and advisor. Today, we're talking to Lynn Greenberg, founder and CEO of a cutting-edge platform focused on reducing turnover and enhancing the social well-being of relocated mobile remote employees and their families. And the company, by the way, is called Pivt. Good morning, Lynn, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure.
I want to know, how did Pivt actually start? Like, what was the kernel? What was that seed that made you say, oh, light bulb on, I've got to fix this problem?
Yeah, so I had never had an intention of starting a company. I took one business class in college, had no tech experience, but right after graduating from college, I relocated to London to work for Bloomberg. And I landed there without knowing anyone, faced the issue as a 21-year-old that all people do when moving somewhere new, which is, where do you start to make your new city feel like home? And despite the fact that I had a pretty hefty relocation package, the one thing that was missing for me turned out to be the number one concern of all relocated and mobile employees, which is that social well-being. And I struggled with things like, how do I get trusted advice on where to live? Which bank do I join? What are the answers to the questions I don't know to ask? How do I recreate my network from scratch? And as I started diving in deeper and asking others, first expats at Bloomberg London, and then at large, I quickly realized it was much bigger than just myself. So spent about 3 years over there doing work on the side, trying to validate this. And what I quickly found was that companies spend on average $90,000 domestically, $300,000 internationally, relocating a single employee. And a third of them will quit their job within a year or move back home because of their and their family's inability to socially acclimate. And for me, I had the most incredible 3 years. And, it was very important for me to create a solution that would allow people to take these life-changing opportunities in unfamiliar places and make the most of them without thinking twice, and because they were supported. And so that was really the genesis to start Pivt.
So how does Pivt actually work? Like, is it for the employee? Is it for the employer? Or do both people use it? Like, how does the application actually work?
Yep. So it is given to the employee on behalf of the employer. So it's a 12-month plus subscription, typically given to the employee the moment they find out they're relocating. And then we really stay with them throughout their post. We also give free access to the partner's spouse, which is really important to us,
Yeah.
and also very important to the employer, because 70% of relocations will fail, not because the actual employee has difficulty acclimating,
Yeah.
but because the partner or spouse have trouble doing so, and they're so often left out of the mix.
And they don't get to work. That's the other thing. If you're being transferred overseas, you've got the visa to actually work for this company, but your spouse may be leaving a job,
Correct.
a vocation and a job at home. And then when they get there, they're like, okay, like, what am I supposed to do all this time during the day? How can I get involved in the community? And I've now don't have employment, which is
Right.
a big part of like who we are. I would imagine, like, also with kids involved,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to
Yep.
be a really big support system. So if I was a employee and I got this, how do you follow me through the journey? Like, what do you, if I'm gun landing in Paris, for example, and I don't speak that much French, like, what, and
Mm-hmm.
I've got two kids, like, how would you actually work with me?
Yeah. So it's a great question. So we typically get in front of the relocated employee the moment they find out they're relocating. So prior to the move, they'd get access to Pivt. They could log on. The partner spouse could log on as well. And one of the first things we have them do is fill out a quick living assessment, which gets them starting to think about their goals, interests, passions, expectations. We then take that to level set their expectations and connect them to people and resources that can help them achieve their goals. The second aspect that we help them with is really building and cultivating a community, which we do both on and off the app. So we will proactively recommend that you connect with others based on the fact that you're also relocating with 2 kids. You speak English. You are also relocating with the same company.
Mm.
You can direct message them, form group chats, get advice. We also have a larger community messaging platform where you can create events, connect based on general discussion. But that's just part of it. And we know that if we're doing our job right, then we're also getting people out into the real world and building connections there. And so we may nudge you and say, hey, Cynthia, you told us you like soccer. Have you checked out these pickup leagues? This is a great way to build community. Or you probably have a coffee shop nearby. Why
Mhm.
don't you go in, introduce yourself, and tell them your order? Because that next time you go in and they remember you, you're going to feel that sense of belonging. The third aspect that we work on is really ensuring a strong and healthy mindset. As you just went through it, and anyone that relocates knows it's one of life's 3 most stressful events.
Yeah.
What we want you to also to know is that it's life-changing and that people on this platform are going through what you're going through, have gone through it, and are here to help you succeed. We've mapped out the relocation journey to a T. Based on where we know you are, we'll do wellness check-ins and say, Cynthia, we know you're right past that honeymoon stage. How are you doing? And based on how you respond, we'll connect you to people or resources that can help you. We'll also take that high level program information back to these companies we work with to drive business decisions, saying, your employees are really struggling at this point. Here's the top 5 things that they're looking for. Um,
It's got to be
so
such valuable information, A, for the employer, because what you just said was, I just want to back up for a second. $90,000 to relocate somebody in the US, $300,000 to relocate somebody outside of the US. And what's the percentage of people that don't stick? I mean, it's a high
a third,
percentage. It's
a
30.
third within a
That is
year.
that is a big, big number for companies. And the biggest, expense that they have are resources, and the most precious, especially now. You look at the struggle for people to hire,
Mm-hmm.
the
Yep.
whole hiring gap that we
Yep.
have now, hiring the right people, upskilling people that are there, bringing even, let alone adding on, a relocation. How is the kind of, I'm assuming this is the same, but all these digital nomads out there too, that's
Mm-hmm.
a whole, I mean, they're not backed by a company, maybe they're just a digital nomad that wants
Right.
to happen, says, hey, there are 52 countries now that allow me to live there as long as I have income
Mm-hmm.
coming in and I can support myself. That's like a whole nother generation or
Mm-hmm.
group segment of people that could definitely use the Pivot app.
Correct. And actually, we've been starting to support that demographic in 2 ways. Without, as you know, with the startup, you have to focus on
Yep.
one and then expand from
Yep.
there. But what we're starting to see actually this year is companies come to us and say, we have we have employees that can work remotely. They're relocating on their own.
Yeah.
We want to support them because we understand that whether they're relocating with us or on their own, if they're struggling with these things, they're not going to be as productive, right? And so we want to give them something. Can you give this to our self movers? So that's the first thing we're starting to see more and more. The second thing is about a year ago, we started realizing that what we were doing to support companies also transcended to what a lot of cities were trying to do. As you were alluding to, just within the US, 78 cities and towns have set up incentive structures to
Yep.
get, remote workers to relocate there in order to boost their economy. And so we started working with some of these cities like Tulsa, Oklahoma,
Yep.
um, to say, let us help you attract and retain that top talent, protect that investment so that they can stay, contribute back, um, and really make the most of that experience.
On the digital nomad thing, it's just because I am one now, or we are one now, and our move to kind of LA, pulling up stakes in New York after so long, and coming to LA and really getting rid of everything. We're our next step for us personally is Barcelona. So I know my husband's been looking at it for the last year or so, and he's found some Facebook groups,
Mhm.
but a lot of times they're just full of a bunch of expats, and you see all this stuff they're talking about, like, okay, you're not who we are.
Right.
You're talking about things that we don't kind of care about as much.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure this is the right group. He's gone in a couple times, and I looked at the texts back and forth and what they're talking about. none of them were talking about the things that we're interested in. None of them were speaking Spanish or texting and saying it. I'm like,
Right.
okay, you're all just all sitting there talking, speaking English, so which is fine, great.
Right.
Knock your socks off. But I want to immersion in a different way. And
Yeah.
I hadn't found any other groups that I thought were relevant, again, to our
Hmm.
frame of mind,
Yeah.
maybe. Not even age, it was like the frame of mind. So I'm really interested in that because I know internationally, so many cities are allowing digital
Yep.
nomads and to come in a very different way where they're contributing to the economy. You're buying,
Right.
you're there, you're renting a property or buying a property, you're there for X period of time. And I don't see that slowing down. So I see such a
Yeah.
huge opportunity for Pivot. And you guys have already done the legwork.
Hmm.
You've already done the legwork. I'm definitely joining. So hands down,
Good. You got one user.
we got a
Yeah.
new, well, two. You'll have my husband
Two.
too. Definitely.
Perfect.
On the kind of journey of building, a business, if you were to give anyone advice on, building a business, market fit, raising capital, like these are all kind of big subject pieces, but like where have you struggled? What have you seen? What have you learned? Some tips and tricks for the audience, because I've got a lot of entrepreneurs that follow this.
How much time do you have?
I know, right? It could go on. Well, we could always do a second podcast. It's all
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So many. I feel like I learned so much just within a day. And I always joke with people that in the 10 years since I thought of the idea, I think I've made more mistakes and have accumulated more lessons learned than most people have in a lifetime. Um, if I were gonna kind of boil it down, the first thing, in talking to entrepreneurs or prospective entrepreneurs is just, making sure that you um, that you stay true to your why. Um, Very true to our name. We have pivoted a couple of times. We started, as you probably know, as a consumer app originally.
Yep.
And then we were approached by HSBC and found that market demographic. And when it was difficult for us to kind of say, let's let's go in this new direction.
Right.
Um, but ultimately, what it came down to was our why, which is how do we create a platform where people can take these life-changing opportunities in new places and make the most of it. And what we realized was that this was just a different way to get there.
Yeah.
But and I think it's important to stay really close to your customer and stay really close to the market and really understand what that means. However, not rendering on your mission and your why. Like that has to stay consistent. You're going to change in so many different capacities, but it's so important that you stay true to that. Um, so, that would be the first thing I would say. No's get you closer to a yes.
Yeah.
There's so many no's that you're going to come across.
So many, so many. So I don't think really people understand what it means to get no's constantly on something, but every time you're doing one, and I do find a lot of these, not every angel, not every angel's probably more often than VC, but when you actually go back and say, okay, why not? Like, what were
Right.
the actual reasons? You know, they owe it to you to give
Yeah.
you actual reasons. You
Right.
And, I've heard way too many stories of like, well, if you get to this point, then we can do this. And then you get to that point, you go back, like, well, then there's this one. It's like, they're probably not the right investor for you,
Yeah.
you
And
know?
that brings up a very good point too, and this is what I learned when I was in venture prior, was it's a marriage, right? So
Um,
um, it's so easy to get, blitzed and glammed with the name of the investor and the
yeah,
check size, but
yeah,
it is really important that you're on the same page about the team, about the mission, about the timeline, because it could just turn into a horror story,
yep,
if not. And so to be really selective with that, I think is so important. I would also say, lastly, I think it's really important to build culture from day one. It's really hard to back into.
yeah,
Um, and if you can be intentional about it from day one, I think it's really important, especially as we go into more and more of a remote setting.
Yeah.
It becomes that much more important.
And that it can't be overestimated either at how important it really is, because we've all worked at companies that, oh, they're amazing and then you realize you get inside, you're like, there's a lot of mission statements and visions that don't really match up with how I feel or what I thought I came here to do.
Right.
And have a lot of talk. And then
Right.
the companies that you get into and you're like, wow, I found my tribe.
Right.
I still have friends from one of the first big corporate jobs I ever had, and that was, 1995. Like, we're still all good friends because there was a culture there of
Mhm.
honesty, integrity, winning, teamwork that, again, it bonded all of us in a way that, and it was a huge company. I mean, we probably had
Right.
20,000 employees, a huge
Right.
company. But so you can do that at scale, but it has to come with all the things you're talking about, which is your North Star,
Yeah.
everybody understanding what the North Star is and building that culture, what you want the culture to be from day one, and how do you also attract people that
Hmm.
challenge the company and challenge,
Right.
but that also again believe in that North Star and have
Yeah.
the same vision. Not an easy task.
It is not. And it's, I talk to a lot of early stage entrepreneurs a lot about getting your team and how do you get great talent, because it's such a hard paradox, because the
Yeah,
people as your early employees need to be a representative of your brand.
yeah,
But how do you attract the best employees, right? When you can't offer them the salary that
yeah,
some of the large companies do.
yeah, yeah.
And a lot of that does come down to the mission and culture. Um, and that's why it makes it even more important.
And those first people too, being able to have, allowing them to help develop that culture and be part
Right.
of not just
Exactly.
building a product, but building a company and a culture, I think is very exciting, beyond what money can do. You know,
Absolutely.
people that just want the money aren't always the best fit in the company. People who actually want to have a place to be with other people that are like them and build a culture end up being, really invaluable and great leaders. And they're the best spokespeople for the product and the company anyway.
Right. Exactly. It's so true.
Any parting thoughts to entrepreneurs out there about going for the gold? Because I know you said 10 years and I was like, yep, that sounds about right. It's not for everybody, but
Yeah. Yeah. 10 years since I had the idea. But yeah, I'll go back to what I said earlier. I think being an entrepreneur has been glamorized. There are plenty of ups and downs. It's
yeah,
a
yeah,
lot harder than anyone thinks
yeah,
before getting into it. And so I think that is why it is so much, so important that you're passionate about what you're doing, and that you stay really close to that why.
perfect. Thank you so much, Lynn. It's so great to see you again, and congratulations on all the growth with Pivot. And we'll be using it as we move on to Barcelona next year, the year after. I'm hoping sooner than later, but it's all good. We'll definitely be using the app.
Thank you so much. So appreciate you having me.